Thank you very much, Natalie. It's a great pleasure to be here, and congratulations to you, Taz. I consider it a real privilege to come along and talk at the 11th Teaching Matters series, because for me, one of the reasons why I'm in university is because I think teaching really does matter. And today I'm pleased to be able to talk about a pilot project that we've run at Monash, where we're trying to look at embedding sustainability in the curriculum and look at some of the things that we've learned from that. Chris?
Can you get the lapel? Oh, it's on.
Is it on? Yeah. Is it on? Yeah, great. Just to outline my presentation, I'll start with a brief introduction to put education and sustainability into a little bit of context. I'll then talk about this project where we focused on embedding sustainability in the first year engineering program, talk about the nature of the project and some of the insight that's come from the evaluation of that, and then I'll draw out what are some of the limitations of that project, what are some of the implications, and talk about what we've concluded from this and identify some future directions. This was a quote from a submission to a parliamentary inquiry on a sustainability charter, that before we can even start talking to people about sustainability, we need to be able to communicate what it is. One of the challenges is that our understanding of what sustainability comprises is evolving, and it's not a precise term. One of the definitions that most people often cite is from the Brundtland inquiry, that sustainable development meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And while that definition certainly provides an indication of the intergenerational dimension of sustainability, I will admit that as a practitioner on a day-to-day basis, I struggle with that definition to know what does it really mean, what should I be doing to advance that. So the notion of the three pillars of sustainability, the social, the economic and the environmental, provides insight into the different dimensions of sustainability. For me, building off that notion of the three pillars, the thing that helps me think about some of the issues and the trade-offs is actually an analogy with a stool. And one of the legs of the stool is the economy, another one's the planet or the environment, and another one's the social leg. And if you imagine trying to sit on a stool where one leg is really strong and the other two have got cracks appearing in them, it's not going to be a very comfortable ride. And as a gross generalisation, we've spent a lot of time strengthening one of the legs on that stool. There's so much focus in the policy debate around strengthening the economic leg of that stool. The cracks are appearing in the social and the environmental leg. And so we need to be thinking about what can we do to stabilise that stool. To me, it's also important to highlight that the stool's got three legs. A lot of the discussion around sustainability understandably focuses on the environmental leg. But if we only strengthen that leg and the social leg gets bigger cracks in it, that's not going to be a sustainable long-term situation. And I suppose I feel particularly privileged to have had this opportunity to come down to Tasmania to speak, because while every state in Australia faces challenges of sustainability, I don't think there's any one state that puts them more sharply into focus than Tasmania, where there is so much debate about what policy initiatives need to be done to protect the environment. But in the spirit of sustainability, just protecting the environment and having a decaying social structure is not a long-term solution. Doing that and not having a degree of economic strength is also not going to build a sustainable future. When I look to examples of Greece and Spain at the moment, and I can only begin to imagine the depth of the social problems that are going to arise with youth unemployment rates of 50% as the economy cracks and the implications of that for pressure on the environment. I'll come back to this point later on, but I want to issue a big challenge to everyone in this room. In this state, you've got an important role to play in helping to balance that stool, and to keep in mind in the context of your teaching and your research, what's the relationship of your work to the social, the economic and the environmental pillars of sustainability? I wanted to spend a moment to draw a distinction which is made in the literature between education about sustainability and education for sustainability. A lot of the work in the sustainability field initially grew out of disciplines around environmental science, and so understanding the magnitude of the sustainability challenges is really important. But passively understanding the magnitude of the problems doesn't necessarily address those problems. And so this distinction between education about sustainability and education for sustainability, where the for component includes things like not only the knowledge, skills and understanding, but also the motivating and empowering people to do something about it. I often reflect on Al Gore's movie and book, An Inconvenient Truth, where he talks about the two extremes, denial and despair. And yet we've got people in the community that deny the nature of the sustainability challenge. Some people feel so overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problems that they say, well, nothing that I can do is going to stop the train wreck. Those two extremes we've got to work to address. So what's the status of education for sustainability in Australia? There was a report commissioned recently in Victoria that highlighted that really a two-speed analogy really applies. In the TAFE and the vet sector, they are miles ahead of us as a gross generalisation in the university sector. And that's because there was funding put in to update all the training packages in TAFE and vet to embed sustainability. And there's a community demand out there for green plumbers, green electricians, green carpenters. On the university side, this report's conclusion was that efforts to green the campus have really led education for sustainability in terms of education practices at certainly all Victorian universities, and I think that's probably fair more widely afield. Certainly at Monash we've been making a lot of strides, and I'm delighted to hear that there are presentations today about what UTAS is doing on the campus. But we're still in the early stages, I think, of a transformation of tertiary education to really embed sustainability in the curriculum. And although a lot of that takes place at the level of individual unit champions, I don't think that the unit or subject champion approach is going to get us to where we need to be. We need to think more holistically across the curriculum. And that's the context for the project that I wanted to talk about today. I should perhaps make a comment about why is that sort of resistance. Well, we've got resource constraints, and I've been hearing about the challenges that UTAS is having. We're having the same ones at Monash. Every time I speak to colleagues at any university around Australia, we're in a resource-constrained environment. There's going to be no easy solution to that. I don't think that the situation's going to change overnight. But that alone shouldn't be the excuse for not starting to move on an important agenda. There are, in some corners, philosophic opposition. People say that education shouldn't be for anything, and I'd be happy to have a discussion with people about whether any aspect of education is value-free. Or that sustainability is a political flavour of the month, or it's a green agenda. Well, it's really a lot broader than that. The thing that I see where I work is the tension that's created by priority overload and conflict. Monash seems to have a capacity to develop a new priority about every week. and we've got that dynamic tension between research intensive and what do we do with teaching. And we've all, as university academics and as university staff, we've all got to walk that tightrope. And the other thing that I see in some of the silos where I work back home is a resistance from the point of view of teaching evaluation to say, I don't need to do anything with that subject. It's met the minimum requirements in the teaching evaluation last semester. I got a 3.2. I don't need to touch it. Well, that to me is not an appropriate mindset for a modern academic. But the reality, I think, is that individual staff can have an impact. We can all start to embed sustainability in the subjects that we teach and to adopt an evolutionary rather than a revolutionary approach to do that. While I think that's important, and I suspect there are many people in the room today reflecting the presentations that are already on that journey, I think the other challenge is to look holistically across programs to see how do we really embed sustainability as part of a complete program, not to have some sustainability champions and some unsustainability champions in the way that education is delivered. And really that's the context for this pilot project that I want to describe today. In 2011, with the support of some funding from Sustainability Victoria, we undertook a project to look at embedding sustainability in the first-year engineering program. We chose first-year engineering for two reasons. Number one, it's a combined first year, so no matter whether the students are moving into civil or mechanical or chemical, they do a common first year. So it was a good touch point to get access to nearly 1,000 students. The other thing was that from the perspective of accreditation, Monash was going to need to lift its game a bit in terms of embedding sustainability, because the Institution of Engineers that accredits engineering courses was wanting to see that universities were addressing sustainability more strongly. So Sustainability Victoria gave us a grant to look at an approach to embedding sustainability in the curriculum. And what we did was do the development work in 2011. We piloted it in first semester 2012, and I'll talk about some of the evaluation results, and then that's been rolled over into second semester 2012. The way that the project evolved was as a series of workshops, and it turned out that I think this was very important in keeping academic staff engaged and not overwhelming them. The first workshop we held in the city, and it included external and internal stakeholders. The external stakeholders included representatives from the Institution of Engineers, but also a number of engineering firms across all disciplines of engineering. And the purpose of that first workshop was to try and identify where are our competency shortfalls, what skills do our graduates need for their careers in the future, and where have we got the holes at present. And what that workshop came up with in the context of sustainability were some learning objectives for first year engineering that we wanted to cover to be able to embed sustainability. Now, like with any meeting on a university campus, we weren't able to get all the first year teachers along to that first workshop. So we had a second little workshop, which was really a lunch meeting, where we did make sure that we brought together all the first year teachers, the ones that could be at the first workshop and the ones that couldn't be there. We gave them an update on the outcomes of that workshop, and we did a mapping exercise. We looked at what are the learning objectives that you've got for each of your first year subjects now, and how do they align with these learning objectives that we'd like to have in first year. We then went away and sort of summarised that mapping and brought the first year staff back for a one-day workshop where we tried to look at how we could actually move this forward. So we presented the results of the mapping, which highlighted where we had some sustainability content and where we had the holes, and then needed to work through as a team to identify how we could actually take this forward without overwhelming the academic staff. We then had a final review in January, just before the start of the academic year, and as part of that we did some one-on-one coaching with the staff where we were able to identify additional resources that we could make available to their students to help them with their particular subjects. In terms of that first workshop, the learning objectives that we identified, or learning outcomes, covered 4 areas. One was understanding what sustainability is and what its relevance is to the field of engineering. Another catch-all we called thinking dispositions, and that included systems thinking, critical thinking, and importantly for engineers, life cycle thinking and life cycle analysis. There were then 2 other learning outcomes areas, one around natural systems and understanding the relationship between humans and the natural environment, and one on professional and personal attributes. Now, they're often things that get mentioned in the context of university courses. The dimension that was picked up here in particular was persuasive communication and negotiation, because oftentimes in a consultant-client relationship, you've not got to convince your client to go a little bit further in the sustainability space. Now, in the context of the resources and the time we had available, we weren't able to progress all of those learning outcomes areas. That's why 2 of them greyed out. They're the next cabs off the rank. We decided to hit the ones up the top. So we knew what we wanted to achieve. The challenge then was, how do we achieve that? What sort of a platform, what sort of an approach are we going to have? And what came out of the second workshop with the academic staff was something we called the naval model. Not because there's a lot of navel gazing that went on, but because it was an analogy to a fleet. We had a subject in the program already called engineering profession. And although it was a good flagship subject for sustainability, the challenge was it was not a core subject. It was in the elective stream. So we couldn't guarantee that all first year students would do that subject. We needed to put sustainability in as part of the core. So we needed the Armada, we needed the other ships to also be flying a sustainability flag. But then the idea came up about a supply ship. And the supply ship was the ship that supplies the information to the Armada. And technically what that meant was a web-based portal. So we developed a portal that provided information about sustainability and engineering that was a supply ship not only for the students but also for the academic staff. And that was a way that we could help support them to embed sustainability without just leaving it to them to say, well, can you find all the material you need to talk about process systems and sustainability? Now, we use a slightly different learning management system to you guys. We're on Moodle, and this is technically what the site looked like. We didn't have a lot of time and resources, so it became a Moodle site. So this is for, we called it Sustainability in First Year Engineering. So every first year engineering student was given access to this site. It had content areas around sustainability in context, life cycle analysis, systems thinking and critical thinking. There were some online discussions that the students could contribute to, and I'll mention more about those in a moment. And over this side was a block that somebody was able to develop. It was actually a link to an online newspaper thing that goes out and grabs articles about sustainability in engineering and presents it as a newspaper. And every time you click on that link, it updates it and refreshes it with new articles. So it was a way of making it much more contemporary. Now, each of these blocks, when you open them, had this format. We had some specific outcomes we were wanting to achieve. There were webcast mini lectures. These were little short clips from Gary Codner, who was the ADE at that time, and myself, usually around 8 to 10 minutes long, little mini lectures about parts of the content. We had some other introductory video clips. Most of those we found from YouTube. There was just an amazing amount of material out there that was relevant. We had some activities and discussion. So this was to get the students thinking about what's the relevance of this on campus, how could you think about applying this? So for the material and life cycle analysis, we got them thinking about paper towels or electric hand dryers in toilets. We had resources, we had resources that were tagged to specific first year units. So if a first year teacher was going to be giving an assignment around something, they could direct the students to the relevant page where there was specific material related to that topic. And then for the ones that really wanted to go further, we had some additional resources. So the idea was the first year staff directed the students to this website. Some of them changed assignments so that they had a sustainability component, and the students needed to go here to get material for their assignments. What did we learn from the process? I think one of the most rewarding things out of this was what a great exercise in staff engagement it was. Maybe things are very different at UTAS, but this was actually the first time that all the first year lecturers had been in one room together, talking about something that brought them out of their silos and gave them something to speak at across disciplines. So it was really, really powerful in terms of creating a bit of stronger spirit amongst the first year staff. We got great buy-in from the external stakeholders. It was also very consistent buy-in, and I think that provided an indication of how important the issues were to our external stakeholders. The other thing I think was important was that because we had it in little broken up steps, it didn't overwhelm staff by giving them a big to-do list. We sort of helped to spread the load out over time. And certainly the general sense of collegiality was just fantastic. I thought that was probably an unevaluated but potentially very positive outcome from this that might have spin-offs in other respects. Now, how did we go about trying to evaluate the impact of it? We did some surveys with the students to try and measure their understanding of sustainability and their perceptions about its importance. And we ran those surveys during orientation week before they had access to the material, and then again at the end of semester. And we had a 31% response rate in the before survey. We then had an attrition, so not all of those who did the before survey answered the after survey, but because we were able to link the responses, so students were provided their ID number, I was able to get reasonable statistical power out of the fact that we had 80 responses that were both before and after. And today I'll present some results from analysis of just the before data and then the before versus the after data. Sorry, the bar graph is a little bit fuzzy, but the concept here was we had a series of phrases that we were asking the students to indicate what's your level of knowledge of that term. And they could respond to never heard of it, I've heard of it but I couldn't describe much about it, I could describe parts of it, or I could describe it in detail. So the green and the purple meant there's reasonably deep sort of knowledge around that. So not surprisingly, life cycle analysis, systems thinking, biomimicry, which is design drawing on things in nature to make design more efficient, were aspects that these incoming first year students had never heard of. A large percentage of them had heard about what the definition of sustainability and had some sort of an idea about dimensions of sustainability. So this was their knowledge. We also looked at how important did they think sustainability was for them, for their profession, their community. And here the picture's a little bit different. Purple's very important, green important, possibly important, not important. And you can see that they all thought that sustainability is really important for future generations and society worldwide. Bring it back to them personally, and there was about 1 in 5 that weren't really sure about whether this stuff was of relevance to them. But as a gross generalisation, higher levels of importance given to sustainability than necessarily knowledge. So what we were able to do then was track, are there any differences in those knowledge and importance scores between the start and the end of the semester? One of the things that I found very interesting was because we had that larger sample of before data, we could look at whether there were any differences across groups, and we did pick up some differences, particularly international versus domestic students. The international students generally gave lower knowledge scores on a number of components on that little survey about sustainability, and they also gave lower importance scores on a couple of things. Now, we haven't taken this any further, but given that all Australian universities are drawing from a very large catchment of students, this, I think, provides some food for thought about what's the relative levels of understanding and importance that students from different backgrounds might give to these issues. This was the knowledge results. So the green bars are the after results and the red bars are the before. And what I've highlighted is all the cases where there were statistically significant improvements in knowledge of sustainability by the end of the semester as opposed to the start. Now, I acknowledge that this is students' self-reported perceptions of their knowledge of sustainability, but at least we were able to, across the dimensions of sustainability, what are the engineering or company responses, life cycle analysis had a big one, systems thinking, biomimicry, and overall across the knowledge scores we had a statistically significant increase in that knowledge. As I remarked a moment ago, coming into this process there was a fairly high level of importance given to sustainability. So we didn't get any statistically significant increases in importance of sustainability between before and after. And because we only had a small sample size, I didn't have the power to be able to look at subgroups in the after data. So, what are some of the limitations? Well, from an experimental design point of view, we've only got a treatment group, I don't have a control group. So I acknowledge that that's a bit of a shortcoming. I've looked at only measures of student perception. I haven't got data back from staff about how the students actually went on assignments or exams yet. So those are some limitations. But I think in the context of this conference, there's a number of implications that come out of that that are relevant to the 4 themes. In terms of sustaining community, one of the things that was a feature of the project was the great engagement we got with external stakeholders and also internal stakeholders. And I think that will be to our benefit beyond just the case of this project. In terms of, we've also strengthened the first year teaching community. So in terms of sustaining community, I think the project's produced some good results. In terms of sustaining curriculum, clearly the focus of this was trying to deliver a change in the way that we embed sustainability in the curriculum. And now I reflect upon it, there's almost elements of a blended learning model. So it wasn't the case that every lecturer went and introduced lectures on sustainability. What they did was get the students to go and look at the website, and if I've watched that video in Natalie's class, I don't need to go and watch it again when another first year lecturer mentions that material. Sustaining campus life, from an engineering perspective, a bit like architecture, the infrastructure of the university is a great exemplar about how we should or should not be developing infrastructure. So the campus as a living laboratory is a really powerful opportunity to highlight the importance of life cycle analysis or building design and implications for sustainability. And finally, sustaining culture. I think that an important part of this is not only what have we done to use some technology to help people think more about sustainability and to support their thinking, but also to try and strengthen the link between teaching and research activities and teaching and learning activities and research in this space. So to finish up with some conclusions, I think we've benefited a lot from this pilot project in first year engineering, not only in terms of the process, but also the outcomes. The process certainly engaged and supported the academic staff through a process of change, but it was evolutionary, it was not revolutionary. So they didn't have to throw out everything and start again. While there were limitations, I think it's been very encouraging that we at least got statistically significant results in terms of improvements in student self-reported knowledge of sustainability by being exposed to this initiative. Now, this was a pilot. We've taken it forward in 2012. We're in the process of developing an EFS strategy for the university, and this gives us a lot of opportunities. We've got to take it deeper in first year engineering because we've only picked up 2 of those 4 learning outcomes areas. We've got to take it further in the engineering program because the students have another 3 years beyond first year. And what I'm keen to try back at Monash is to pick this up and try the approach in another faculty to see how we could tailor it to the needs of a different discipline area. So there's a lot of scope for us to learn from this. In terms of future directions, I think it's fair to say that achieving sustainability presents a huge challenge for society as a whole. It's an evolving concept. It's a concept that not everybody's on board on. It's still a very, I think, divisive issue within the community and a polarising one. But advancing education for sustainability is really, really important. And I come back to that 3-pillar, the three-legged stool model, that thinking about those 3 dimensions, not only in terms of strengthening each leg of the stool, but thinking about the implications of this for not only our teaching and learning, but also our research activities. What I wanted to finish with today was a quote, and one of the great things about this experience was after finishing all the marking and Board of Examiners last week, this was the first guilt-free weekends to come away and spend some time with my family. And we had a wonderful weekend out on the East Coast, down at Binnelong Bay. The weather was perfect and the view of the bay was just superb. And in the house we were staying in, there was a number of coffee table books. One was titled Endangered, it'll come up in a minute, but in the back of the cover there was a quote, and I thought, this is just perfect, because I want to return to the challenge that I issued earlier. UTAS has got a really important role to play in helping the community in Tasmania come to grips with sustainability. And this was the quote from the back of the cover of the book. Tasmania is slowly evolving towards goals we cannot now see. That to me is the notion of sustainability. Our understanding of that's going to emerge over time. If we can revise our attitudes towards the land under our feet, if we can accept a role of steward and depart from the role of conqueror, if we can accept the view that man and nature are inseparable parts of a unified whole, then Tasmania can be a shining beacon in a dull, uniform and largely artificial world. And that's the challenge I leave to you guys, because I think you've got a key role to play in achieving that future. Thank you.